My name is Caleb, and for most of my 36 years, I've viewed my life through the lens of a spreadsheet. It's what I do for a living. I'm a data analyst. I take chaotic, sprawling sets of information, and I find the patterns, the logic, the signal in the noise. It's a skill that has served me well professionally, allowing me to buy my own condo in a decent part of the city, build a respectable savings account, and live a life of quiet, ordered self-sufficiency. The irony, which I only recently allowed myself to fully process, is that I failed to apply this same analytical rigor to the most significant data set of all, my own family. In the spreadsheet of the Miller family, I was a fixed asset, reliable, stable, always performing as expected. My brother, Leo, 2 years my junior, was a volatile stock, flashy, exciting, but prone to spectacular crashes that always required a bailout. My parents, Helen and Richard, were the fund managers, constantly reallocating resources from my column to his in a desperate attempt to keep his value from plummeting to zero. The scene that best illustrates this dynamic didn't happen in a boardroom, but on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. I was deep in a quarterly performance analysis, tracing data points that would affect thousands of dollars in marketing spend, when my phone buzzed with a text from my mom. I glanced at it, and the familiar, syrupy sweet tone of her words flowed off the screen. "Caleb, honey, hope you're having a good day. Quick question, Leo's car is making that awful noise again, and the mechanic says it's the transmission. About $800. I know he'd be mortified to ask, and he's so stressed with the engagement planning. Would you be a total angel and help him out? We can sort it out later." I closed my eyes. The phrase "sort it out later" was the family equivalent of a junk bond, a promise with no intention of ever maturing. I minimized my work spreadsheet and opened my banking app. My thumb hovered over the transfer button. Right there on the screen was my own savings goal, the one I'd named Peru Trip Fund, attempt number 2. The first attempt had been derailed 5 years ago by a similar emergency. Staring at the name now felt like a small, private joke at my own expense. A wave of something hot and bitter washed through me. It was the familiar taste of resentment. For a flicker of a second, I imagined typing back, "No, he's 34. He can get a second job or sell his new gaming console." I even typed out the first word, "sorry," but then I deleted it. I deleted it because I could already hear her voice on the phone later, laced with disappointment. "We just thought we could count on you, Caleb. You're the stable one." My father would be silent, his disapproval a heavy, suffocating blanket. Leo would call me cheap. It was easier to just pay. It was easier to maintain the system. I executed the transfer. The app confirmed $800 had moved from my account. I texted back a single, clean data point, "Done." Her reply was instantaneous, a cascade of heart and prayer hands emojis. "You're a lifesaver. The best son a mother could ask for. We're so lucky to have you." I put the phone down, face down on my desk. I wasn't the best son. I was the most profitable one. For years, I had been the family's invisible investor, pouring my time, my money, and my emotional capital into a fund that yielded no dividends. The returns were never meant for me. They were just used to cover the endless, compounding losses of my brother. And as I stared at the silent, black screen of my phone, a cold, analytical thought surfaced, unbidden and unwelcome. Every investment portfolio needs a periodic review, and mine was long overdue. To understand a transaction on that Tuesday, you have to look at the historical data. The patterns don't emerge from a single event. They are woven into the fabric of years. The most glaring data point, the one that served as a precedent for all future emotional and financial liability, was the car loan. It was 6 years ago. I was 30, had just received a promotion, and was finally feeling the ground firm up beneath my feet. I remember the smell of the lawyer's office, a sterile mix of old paper and cheap air freshener. My parents had called me for an important family meeting. My father, Richard, did most of the talking, which was rare. He cleared his throat, shuffled papers, and avoided my eyes. "Caleb," he'd begun, "your mother and I, well, our credit isn't what it used to be, and we need a reliable car. The old one is on its last legs." He slid a brochure for a sensible, gray sedan across the polished mahogany table. "The bank said we'd need a co-signer, someone with a good record." All eyes turned to me. Leo was there, of course, slouched in his chair, scrolling through his phone. This had nothing to do with him, yet his presence was a silent statement. He can't do this. So you have to. My mother, Helen, placed her hand on my arm. Her touch was light, her nails perfectly manicured. It would just be a formality, honey. We'd never miss a payment. It would mean the world to us. I looked at the lawyer, a man with tired eyes who had seen this exact scene play out 1,000 times with 1,000 other families. He gave me a look that was a masterclass in professional neutrality, yet I saw a flicker of something in it. Pity, perhaps. A warning. I ignored it. I signed the papers. My signature, clear and decisive on the dotted line, was the official record of my enlistment as the family safety net. For the first year, it was fine. The sedan was my parents' car. But slowly, ownership began to blur. Leo, who was between jobs, needed to borrow it. Then he needed it for a weekend. Soon, the gray sedan became his de facto vehicle. The pretense was maintained. It was still Mom and Dad's car. But the keys were permanently in Leo's pocket. The real cost became clear about a year later. A certified letter arrived in my mail. It was a notice from the city of Charleston, 100 miles away, for a red light violation, complete with a grainy photo of the gray sedan blowing through an intersection. The fine was $150. I called Leo. I can still hear his laugh on the other end of the line, light and unbothered. Oh man, was that me? I totally forgot. My bad. It was for that concert I went to. Hey, could you just cover it for now? I'm a little short this month. I'll get you back. I paid the fine. I was never gotten back. That small, official envelope was more than just a bill. It was an invoice for my own naivete. It was proof that my name on that loan didn't just make me a co-signer. It made me the designated person responsible for the consequences of my brother's actions. The car wasn't just a car. It was a symbol. It was a tangible asset purchased with my good credit, my stability, and my blind sense of duty, also my brother could have a consequence-free ride through life. My father's words echoed in my head. You're the one we can count on. I just never realized it wasn't a compliment. It was a job description. The phone call that set the final avalanche in motion came on a Thursday. I had just gotten home from a gym, feeling that rare, clean exhaustion that makes you feel in control of your own body. Then my phone rang with the ringtone I'd assigned to my mom. A pleasant, generic chime that belied the complexity of our interactions. Caleb, perfect timing. Her voice was effervescent, bubbling with a level of excitement usually reserved for lottery wins or royal weddings. Have you heard the news? Leo asked Clara to marry him, and she said yes. I offer my congratulations, genuine in my hope that this might be the event that finally pushed Leo into adulthood. Clara was a nice woman, an architect, smart and steady. Maybe she would be a good influence. We're all just over the moon, Mom continued, her voice dropping into a more conspiratorial tone. And listen, we want to do something really special. A surprise engagement dinner for them. Just family, and Clara's parents, of course. Here it comes, I thought. The ask. Clara's father, Mr. Davies, he's a very successful man. An engineer. Very particular. You know, old money. We have to make a good impression. I found a most perfect place, the Skyfall rooftop. It has that incredible view of the skyline. I knew the Skyfall. It was the kind of place where a single cocktail cost more than a week's worth of my groceries. Now, honey, she said, her voice turning to silk. You know how tight things are. But this is about appearances. It's about showing the Davies family that we are of a certain caliber. I was hoping you could help us secure the reservation. Just the deposit. I know you have that fancy credit card with the points. You're so good at handling these things. The framing was brilliant, a masterstroke of maternal manipulation. This wasn't a handout. This was a mission, a delicate operation of social climbing where I, with my fancy credit card and competence, was the secret agent uniquely qualified for the job. She wasn't asking for my money. She was asking for my expertise. I was silent for a long moment. On my coffee table, next to a stack of data science journals, was a paperback I'd bought on a whim last month. The cover was a serene blue, the title in bold white letters. Set boundaries, find peace, a guide to reclaiming yourself. I had read the first 3 chapters. It felt like I was reading an instruction manual for a device I owned, but had never learned how to use. The book seemed to mock me from the table. The silence on the phone stretched. Caleb? Are you there, honey? The lessons from the book: use I statements, state your limits clearly. It's okay to say no, faded into a distant hum. What roared to the forefront was a lifetime of conditioning, a deep-seated programming that equated saying no with causing conflict, with being a disappointment. I closed my eyes, abandoning the new, unfamiliar wisdom of the book for the old, comfortable pain of acquiescence. Of course, Mom, I heard myself say. My voice sounded distant, as if it belonged to someone else. Send me the details. I'll handle it. Oh, you are a saint, she gushed, relief flooding her voice. A true saint. This is going to be a night we'll never forget. She was right about that. It would be a night I would never forget. It would be the night I finally learned that a boundary isn't a wall to keep people out. It's a line you draw for yourself, to show you where you end and they begin. And I was about to be shoved so far past my line that I would finally be forced to see it. The night of the dinner, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting the knot of my tie. It was a dark navy silk, a stark contrast to my crisp white shirt. I wore my best suit, the charcoal gray one I saved for major client presentations. On my dresser lay a gift-wrapped bottle of 25-year-old single malt scotch, a peace offering to the gods of family harmony, and a congratulatory token for Leo. A small, irrational part of me, the part that hope refuses to abandon, thought that maybe tonight would be different. Maybe this grand gesture, this entry into a new phase of life, would reset the family dynamic. I arrived at the Skyfall at 7 o'clock sharp. The hostess, a statuesque woman in a black dress, nodded at my name on a reservation list and gestured toward a private section curtained off from the main dining room. The Miller party is through there, sir. I took a deep breath, the air tasting of money and expensive perfume, and pushed through the velvet curtain. The space was beautiful, I had to admit. String lights were draped overhead like a canopy of fallen stars. The city skyline glittered through floor-to-ceiling windows. In the corner, a small jazz trio played a smooth, unobtrusive melody. And there they all were, about 20 people gathered around a long, elegantly set table. My parents, Leo and Clara, her parents, a few aunts, uncles, and friends. They all had drinks in hand, their laughter echoing in the chic space. I smiled, stepping forward, the heavy bottle of scotch feeling like a ticket of admission in my hand. Evening, everyone. My mother saw me first, her smile tightening for a fraction of a second before relaxing into its usual performative warmth. My father gave me a half-hearted wave. Then Leo turned. That familiar, smug grin, the one that always preceded a joke at my expense, spread across his face. Hey, Caleb. Man, you made it, he said, his voice a little too loud. He barely glanced at the expensive gift in my hand. He then lifted his own hand and pointed. He pointed past the main table, past the last chair, to a corner of the room near the swinging double doors that led to the kitchen and next to a discreet, but still very obvious, stainless steel trash receptacle used by the staff as a busing station. Sitting there, all by its lonesome, was a single, wobbly-looking fold-out chair. It was a metal and plastic afterthought, a stark contrast to the plush, upholstered chairs everyone else occupied. Leo's grin widened. Sorry, man, he said, his voice dripping with mock sympathy that was meant to be funny to everyone but me. This table's for family only. But hey, we saved a spot for you right over there. The jazz trio seemed to falter. A few of Leo's friends snickered. An uncle chuckled awkwardly into his drink. I looked at my mother. She was intently studying a flower in the centerpiece, refusing to meet my eye. My father suddenly found the view out the window utterly fascinating. Clara looked confused, glancing between me and the chair, but Leo wrapped his arm around her, pulling her attention back to him. The silence from my core family was the most damning response of all. It was consent. It was endorsement. My brain struggled to process the data. This wasn't a thoughtless oversight. This was a calculated gesture. The fold-out chair, the location by the trash, and the kitchen door, it was a statement. It was a piece of performance art designed to put me in my place, to designate my role as separate, as utilitarian, as other, and it was being performed in front of Clara's family. The humiliation was the point. Leo wasn't just seating me at a different table. He was publicly assigning me a lower value, ensuring the new members of the family understood the hierarchy from day one. The heat rushed to my face. My ears burned. My throat felt thick, clogged with all the things I wanted to scream. For a moment, I was 13 again, being told to step out of family photo at a wedding because my awkward, gangly frame ruined the aesthetic. I didn't scream. I didn't protest. The lifetime of conditioning held. I walked past the long table of my laughing, drinking family. I reached the folding chair. I placed the $200 bottle of scotch on the floor beside it. And I sat down. I sat there for 1 hour and 52 minutes. I know the exact duration because I watched the numbers on my phone's clock tick over, each minute a small, sharp drop of acid in my gut. For the first 30 minutes, I was adrift in a sea of pure, unadulterated humiliation. I felt the phantom stares of everyone, even when they weren't looking. I felt like a museum exhibit, the dutiful son in his natural habitat. I replayed the moment of Leo's pronouncement over and over, the smugness in his voice, the snickers from his friends, my mother's deliberate ignorance. The heat in my face subsided, replaced by a chilling cold that settled deep in my bones. A waiter, a young man with kind, nervous eyes, approached my solitary outpost. "Sir, are you with the Miller party?" I just nodded, my throat too tight to form words. "Right. Can I, get you a drink?" he asked, his voice low, as if we were co-conspirators in my public shaming. "Just water, please," I managed to whisper. He scurried away and returned with a glass, placing it on the small patch of floor next to my scotch, as there was no table for me. He avoided my gaze and disappeared. He knew. Everyone knew. After the initial shock wore off, something in my analyst's brain clicked on. It was a defense mechanism, I suppose. When the emotional input becomes too overwhelming, revert to data collection. I stopped feeling and I started observing. I detached myself from the scene, watching it unfold as if it were a case study on a screen. I collected data points. Data point A. My mother, Helen. She laughed just a little too loudly at Mr. Davies's dry jokes. Every 10 minutes, she would lean over to make sure his wine glass was full, a gesture of solicitousness that was both transparent and desperate. She was managing her new asset. Data point B. My father, Richard. He spoke only when spoken to. He kept his eyes on his plate. He was a portrait of willful non-existence. His sin wasn't malice. It was a profound, deeply rooted cowardice. He had abdicated his role as a father for the easier job of a spectator. Data point C. My brother, Leo. He was holding court, telling an exaggerated story about a college prank. He was animated, his hands flying, his voice booming. He was performing the role of the charming, successful golden boy. But I could see the subtle signs of effort. The way he glanced at Mr. Davies for approval after a punchline. The way he'd place a proprietary hand on Clara's shoulder, a gesture less of affection and more of ownership. Data point D. Clara and her family. Clara looked beautiful, but her smile seemed fixed. She laughed at Leo's stories, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Her father, Mr. Davies, was the most interesting variable. He was a quiet man, dressed in an impeccably tailored but understated suit. He listened more than he talked. He watched Leo with the impassive, appraising gaze of an engineer examining a blueprint for fatal flaws. He wasn't buying the performance. As I sat there, isolated by the clatter of plates from the swinging kitchen door, I began running a new analysis in my head. For years, I had been tracking the wrong metrics. I had a mental ledger filled with dollars and cents, favors and obligations. The $800 for the transmission, the $150 for the speeding ticket, the $3,000 for the canceled Peru trip, the thousands more in undocumented, interest-free loans. But I was wrong. The currency of this family wasn't money. It was respect. And in that economy, I was bankrupt. I wasn't an asset. I was a utility, to be used when needed and otherwise ignored. I wasn't a pillar of the family. I was the scaffolding meant to support the beautiful facade, but to be torn down and hidden away when the important guests arrived. The last 30 minutes of my vigil were different. The cold in my bones didn't feel like shame anymore. It felt like steel. The humiliation had burned away all the sentiment, all the lingering, childish hope. All that was left was a hard, clear, and unassailable truth. The data was in. The pattern was undeniable. A decision was required. The main course plates were cleared away. Dessert arrived, some elaborate chocolate lava cake creation. Toasts were made. I heard my father's voice, a little slurred, mumbling something about how proud he was of his two boys, a statement so stunningly disconnected from reality that I almost laughed out loud. Leo gave a long, rambling speech about finding his soulmate, and I watched as he conveniently forgot to thank the person who had paid for the venue that was allowing him the spotlight. No one looked in my direction. I was a ghost at the feast, a ghost who was about to be asked to pay the bill. And then it came. I watched the young waiter approach their table, holding a small, black leather folder with the reverence of a sacred text. He paused, looking at my father, who immediately seemed to shrink in his chair. Richard nervously gestured toward Leo. Leo, flushed with champagne and self-congratulation, waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, give that to my brother," he said, pointing a thumb in my direction without even looking. "Caleb's got it. He handles this stuff." The waiter froze for a second, his professional poise faltering. He looked from Leo to my father, then down at the bill, and finally his eyes found me in my corner. The entire party turned to look at me, their faces a mixture of expectation and curiosity. The jazz trio faded into a low hum. The sound of the kitchen door swinging shut felt like a gunshot in the sudden silence. Slowly, the waiter began the long walk across the room. It felt like he was crossing a vast, empty desert. Every eye in the room followed him. With each step he took toward me, I could feel the power dynamic of my entire life shifting beneath my feet. For 36 years, I had been the one they looked to for the solution, for the payment, for the quiet fix. Their expectation tonight was no different. It was automatic, ingrained. He stopped in front of my chair. He had to bend down slightly, as I was seated lower than everyone else. He held out the leather folder. "Sir," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "the total for the event is $4,582.50. The reservation was made with a Visa card ending in 4228. Should I run the final amount on the same card?" It was my card, my name, my money. I didn't look at the bill. I didn't look at the waiter. I looked up, over his shoulder, and met the gaze of my brother across the room. And for the first time that night, perhaps for the first time in my life, I smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It wasn't a forgiving one. It was the calm, neutral, deeply satisfying smile of an analyst who has finally completed his report and is ready to present the findings. I let the silence stretch, savoring it like that expensive scotch I would never open. All the air had been sucked out of the room. I held the undivided attention of every single person. It was a novel sensation. Finally, I spoke. My voice was quiet, but in the profound silence, it carried to every corner of the private dining space. "Not my table," I said. I saw a flicker of confusion in Leo's eyes. He thought I was joking, playing along with his gag. He started to smirk. I clarified, my voice remaining level, almost conversational. "I was told this table was for family only. I'm over here." I gestured with my head toward the busing station. "At the children's table. So no, you can't run that card." The smirk on Leo's face vanished, replaced by a flush of angry red that crept up his neck. "What the hell, Caleb?" he snapped, his voice cracking. "Stop being so dramatic. It was a joke. You're making a scene." "Am I?" I asked a genuine question. I stood up slowly, my knees cracking slightly. I felt tall. I thought I was just following the rules, the ones you laid out so clearly. I finally turned my gaze to the waiter, who looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. "I'm sorry you're in the middle of this, but I'm not with this party. I didn't eat their food. I didn't drink their wine. Therefore, I won't be paying their bill." "Caleb, for God's sake," my mother hissed, her voice low and furious. The sweet, syrupy mask had melted away, revealing the hard, panicked face beneath. "Stop this right now. You're embarrassing us." "Embarrassing you?" I said, and a small, dry laugh escaped me. Mom, with all due respect, I'm just a guy on a folding chair by the trash. I don't see how I could possibly embarrass anyone from over here. Then, a new voice entered the fray. It was quiet, calm, and cut through the rising hysteria like a diamond blade through glass. Excuse me. All heads turned to Mr. Davies. He had placed his napkin neatly on the table and was looking at me, his expression one of intense, analytical curiosity. Then he shifted his gaze to Leo. Leo, he said, his tone that of a CEO asking for clarification in a board meeting. I'm trying to understand the seating logic here. Could you explain it to me? You invite your brother, the man who, I now gather, arranged and paid the deposit for this entire evening, and you seat him by the service entrance. What was the desired outcome of that variable? Leo stammered, his face turning from red to a blotchy purple. We were just ribbing him. It's how we are. I see, Mr. Davies said, though his face said he saw everything. He looked back at me. That was my cue. I wasn't just emotional anymore. I was delivering a report. I took a step forward. The problem, Leo, I said, my voice as steady as a plotted line on a graph, is that you think everything is a joke as long as you're not the punchline. You think this is about one dinner. But I have the data. I looked at my parents. I have a ledger in my head, a spreadsheet of every loan, every emergency, every favor. The car repair last month, $800. The speeding ticket from Charleston, $150. The co-signed loan on the car you treat as your own, $27,000 of liability. The canceled trip to Peru to pay for Dad's surgery 5 years ago, a loss of over $3,000. This dinner's $1,000 deposit is just the most recent entry. I looked back at Leo, who was staring at me, his mouth agape. So no, I'm not paying the $4,582.50. You are. You and your real family. Tonight, I'm just here to close the books. I picked up my coat from the back of the folding chair. I left the bottle of scotch on the floor, a final sunk cost. I gave a polite, almost imperceptible nod to Mr. Davies. And without another word, without looking at my family again, I walked out of the room, leaving behind the deafening silence of a system that had just finally crashed. I didn't go home. I couldn't. My condo, usually a sanctuary of ordered calm, would have felt like a cage. My adrenaline was firing on all cylinders, a buzzing high-frequency current under my skin. I got in my car and just drove, the city lights blurring into long neon streaks. I ended up at a scenic overlook on the edge of town, a place teenagers went to make out and lonely people went to think. I was, for the first time in a long time, the latter. I turned off the engine and sat in the profound silence. The glittering city spread out below me like a discarded blanket of jewels. My phone, which I tossed onto the passenger seat, began to light up, a frantic, desperate beacon in the darkness. First, a text from Leo. WTF was that? You completely humiliated me. You owe me an apology. Then my mom. Caleb, I am so disappointed in you. Your father is beside himself. You ruined your brother's special night over a stupid chair. Call me now. Miss call, Mom. Miss call, Leo. Miss call, Dad. I watched the screen light up and go dark. Each notification a volley of ammunition from a world I had just exited. I felt strangely numb. Not triumphant. Not yet. Just empty. As if I'd been running a marathon for 36 years and had just finally stopped. The emptiness was vast and terrifying, but it was also clean. I was about to turn the phone off when a new message appeared from a number I didn't recognize. My curiosity got the better of me. I opened it. It was a long block of text. Caleb, this is Clara. I am so incredibly, deeply sorry. I don't even know where to begin. I was so caught up in the night, in playing the part of the happy fiancé, that I wasn't paying attention to what was really happening. I saw you at that chair, and I felt a pang of confusion, but Leo just whispered that you were being shy and prefer to have your own space. I chose to believe him because it was easier. That was my mistake. I had to read that part twice. He said I preferred it. The audacity was breathtaking. The text continued. After you left, my father asked the waiter directly what had happened. The waiter told him everything. about how you made the reservation, paid for everything, and were treated when you arrived. My dad has been quiet all the way home. The only thing he said to me was, "Clara, in my business, you never trust a man who cheats his own accountant, because eventually he'll cheat you." He was talking about Leo, but he was looking at me. "I don't know what's going to happen, but I needed you to know that you weren't crazy. You weren't overreacting. You were the only person in that room tonight who acted with any integrity. Again, I am so sorry I was a bystander to your pain." I stared at the screen, at her words. It wasn't the apology that undid me. It was the validation. It was the simple, powerful act of being seen and believed by a stranger. All my life, my reality had been denied. "You're too sensitive." He didn't mean it like that. It was just a joke. "You're overreacting." And here was someone, an outsider, saying, "No, you weren't." A single, hot tear slid down my cheek and splashed onto the phone screen, distorting her words. It wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a tear of release. It was the feeling of a pressure valve, tightened for decades, finally being set free. The system hadn't just crashed. It was beginning a full reboot. The next morning, I woke up feeling like a man who had survived a fever. The world seemed sharper, the colors more vivid. The lingering numbness had been replaced by a quiet, resolute clarity. There were still loose ends to tie up, accounts to be closed. I made coffee, sat down on my laptop, and got to work. My actions were methodical, unemotional. This was no longer a family matter. It was an administrative task, a liquidation. First, I logged into the joint savings account I still shared with Leo. It was an account I'd set up for him years ago as an emergency fund, which I had primarily funded and he had primarily used for non-emergencies like concert tickets and weekend trips. There was about $2,000 left in it. My money. I initiated a transfer for the full amount to my personal checking account. Then, I went through my banking records. I downloaded 5 years of transaction history. With the dispassionate skill of my profession, I highlighted every transfer to Leo or my parents. I compiled them into a clean, simple PDF document. The final tally at the bottom was stark. It didn't include the emotional cost, but the financial one was damning enough. I composed a new email. The recipients were Leo, Helen, and Richard Miller. The subject line was Financial Review 2020 to 2025, account closed. The body of the email contained no emotion. It was a corporate memo. To whom it may concern, effective immediately, I am dissolving all joint financial instruments and informal lines of credit. The joint savings account ending in 8814 has been closed. Attached for your records is a summary of all financial support provided over the past 60 months. No repayment is expected, as these are now being reclassified from loans to sunk costs. Please do not contact me regarding any future financial matters. Regards, Kayla Miller. I attached the PDF ledger and hit send. The feeling was not one of anger, but of profound, cleansing order. I had taken the messy, unspoken chaos of our dynamic and rendered it into a clean, undeniable report. An hour later, my phone rang. It was Leo. I let it go to voicemail. He called back immediately. I answered. "What did you do?" He roared, his voice a frantic panic squall. "My debit card was just declined trying to buy breakfast. It said the account doesn't exist." I held the phone slightly away from my ear. I took a sip of my coffee. "Correct," I said, my voice calm. "The account no longer exists. I closed it. You can't do that. That's my money in there." "Actually, the data indicates it was my money you were spending," I replied, the corporate tone infuriating him further. "As for whether I can do it, the action has been completed, which confirms that I can. Per my email, all shared financial instruments are now terminated." "This is because of the dinner, isn't it?" he sputtered, switching tactics. "You're throwing a tantrum like a child." "No, Leo," I said, and for the first time, I let a hint of my true feelings through. "This isn't a tantrum. This is a corporate restructuring. You define my position as non-family, a contractor at best, and this contractor services are no longer available. You're a grown man. I'm sure you'll figure it out." I hung up the phone before he could reply. I then blocked his number. One by one, I was liquidating the toxic assets from the portfolio of my life. For 2 weeks, the silence was blissful. Then on a Sunday morning, there was a knock on my door. I looked through the peephole and my stomach tightened. It was my mother, standing on my welcome mat, holding a Tupperware container of lasagna as if it were a white flag. I opened the door, but didn't invite her in. I just stood there, my body a barrier in the doorway. She looked older than I'd ever seen her, her eyes puffy, her usual vibrant energy dimmed. "I brought you dinner," she said, her voice small. "I'm not hungry." She flinched, but she held her ground. "Caleb, please, can I just talk to you for 5 minutes? No excuses. I promise." The phrase "no excuses" was a new one. Cautiously, I stepped aside and let her in. She walked to my small kitchen table and sat down, placing the lasagna between them like a negotiator placing a treaty on the table. She took a shaky breath. "I owe you an apology," she began. "I'm sorry you felt so excluded at the dinner." I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. The old me would have accepted that crumb. The new me recognized it for what it was, a non-apology. "No, Mom," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "That's not it. You're not sorry that I felt a certain way. An apology is for what you did. Let's try again." Her face tightened. Tears welled in her eyes. This was the hard part, the part where the responsibility couldn't be deflected. She looked down at her hands, then back up at me, and this time, something was different. The defensiveness was gone. "You're right," she whispered. "I'm sorry for what I did. I saw the chair. I heard what Leo said, and I did nothing. I let it happen. I let it happen because I was scared of upsetting Leo, of ruining the perfect night, of making a scene in front of the Davies. I threw you under the bus to protect my own comfort. It was cowardly, and it was cruel." She finally said it. The truth. "For years," she continued, the words tumbling out now, "we've treated you like a utility, not a son. You were so capable, so quiet, you never asked for anything. We just leaned on you until you almost broke. And I'm so sorry for that. For all of it." I watched her, this woman who had architected so much of my pain, and for the first time, I saw not a manipulator, but a flawed, frightened person who was finally, at long last, telling the truth. I didn't rush to comfort her. I let her sit in the weight of her own words. Finally, I gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Thank you for saying that, Mom." She left the lasagna. As I walked her to the door, I said one last thing. "I love you, Mom, but things have to be different now. Our relationship needs new terms. I will not be the family's emergency plan anymore." She just nodded, tears streaming down her face, and walked away. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet. It was a negotiation. And for the first time, I was setting the terms. The weeks that followed were like the quiet hum after a server has been rebooted. The frantic error messages were gone, replaced by a steady, operational calm. I learned through my Aunt Carol, who had called me to say, "It's about damn time, kiddo," that Clara had officially ended the engagement. Mr. Davies had, in his quiet, methodical way, helped her see that a partnership with Leo would be a lifelong liability. Leo, according to Carol, had moved back into his old bedroom at my parents' house. The golden boy had returned to the nest, his wings clipped. I didn't revel in his failure. I honestly didn't think about him much at all. All my energy, all my focus, was being redirected inward. It was like discovering a massive, untapped reserve of capital that I could finally invest in my own portfolio. I started seeing a therapist, a sharp woman named Dr. Anya Sharma. In our first session, she asked me, "What were you trying to buy with all that effort, Caleb? All that money, all that sacrifice?" The answer came to me with startling clarity. "A seat at the table," I said. She nodded. "And they gave you a folding chair by the trash. What if the goal isn't to get a seat at their table anymore? What if it's to build your own?" Her words became my new operating mission. I started small. On Saturdays, instead of being on call for a family crisis, I started going to a community woodshop a few miles from my condo. I, the data analyst who lived in a world of intangible ones and zeros, found a deep satisfaction in creating something tangible. I learned to use a plane, a sander, a saw. I learned the smell of pine versus oak. I learned the patience of measuring twice and cutting once. My first project was a simple coffee table. I spent weeks on it, sanding the edges until they were perfectly smooth, staining the wood a deep, rich walnut. It was a slow, deliberate process of creation. I was building something for myself with my own two hands. Something solid, something real. One Saturday afternoon, as I was applying the final coat of sealant, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Aunt Carol. Family is doing a quiet Thanksgiving this year. No frills. Mom wanted me to ask if you'd consider coming. No pressure either way. I looked at the coffee table. It was beautiful. It was sturdy. It would be the centerpiece of my living room. My living room. I smiled. A genuine, unburdened smile. I texted her back. I'll come for dinner, but I have plans later, so I can't stay long. The plan, of course, was simply to come home. To my own space. To my own quiet. That evening, after cleaning up at the woodshop, I went home, opened my laptop, and navigated to an airline website. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I booked a non-refundable first-class ticket to Cusco, Peru, for the following spring. There was no hesitation. There was no emergency fund to raid. There was only the quiet, profound satisfaction of a sound investment. I was building my own table, and soon it would have a hell of a view. My balance sheet, for the first time in my life, was finally decisively in the black.